All right, there it is.
Well, hi, those who are watching the recording. You missed a very interesting opening conversation about how we feel about the High Holy Days and why we're in this class, but that was personal information, so you'll have to come and be here live with us to get into that. So we're going to look now at this, some of these opening claims, which is really where the title of this class comes from. Can we change our fates? There is this claim that we say over and over again in the liturgy of the Days of War, Teshuva, Tefila, Tzedaka, Ma'avirin et Roa Hagazera, that Teshuva, together with prayer and righteous giving, transform the evil of the decree. Or, as Shula's probably familiar with, there's often gets sung in Jewish renewal circles as, but turning and yearning and caring have the power to change our fates, or some version of that. So, what do you think of this claim? In what way might our fate be changed, and why these behaviors in particular? Steve, I saw you unmute yourself, so go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, I have the same question that Daniel has about how tzedakah ties into it. You know, and I've been saying this sentence multiple times every year, you know, since I was a kid, right? And I can see how Teshuva and Tefila makes sense to me, because those are, Teshuva is, you know, making amends to the people you've wronged. Tefila is kind of inward facing, making amends to yourself and getting right with yourself. But tzedakah is more like, that makes it look more like you're trying to buy your freedom in a sense. Like, I don't know if that makes sense. Like, it seems more transactional, and that's not usually how Judaism works, right? And so maybe it is a little bit confusing that it's in there.
Right. Other responses? Yeah, Shula, you're nodding. What do you think?
I pretty much feel like Steve does. I do these things because they have a value in themselves, and I don't really believe that I am affecting the future. Except that, of course, we are. Because, the easy way to see that we're affecting the future is by giving tzedakah. But I think we're also affecting it by changing ourselves, so that we will be doing things differently in the future. So I guess I have to take back what I just said. The three may indeed be changing our fates.
Mm-hmm.
If the caring matches up to righteous giving, then that makes a lot more sense to me. Now, with that word, caring, because it's one thing to reflect and then to say words, but if they're empty, then you're better off not. So, but back to Steve's point, like, or just thinking of the scales, you know, as we do of justice, it just, it feels either transactional or whatever other, you know, negative connotations that money and that have. But if it's replaced by that word, and then it makes a lot more sense.
Interesting that you bring in that money has a negative connotation.
Well, I'm I'm in this country. It's so it's definitely double-sided. And so it doesn't have to. That's fair. It doesn't have to. It just it feels like, and maybe I'm also biased by learning about indulgences from the Catholic Church, from the Middle Ages, where that was like, as I understand, like really bad. Like really bad things could be done, and then just kind of buy your way out of that.
You just give generously to the shul at the Yom Kippur
Right.
appeal, and all your sins will be forgiven.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that there's a difference in emphasis, that it's not, I mean, we do ask for money for the shul at the Yom Kippur appeal, but often we're asking for money for other causes, and sometimes synagogues make the decision they don't want to ask for anything for themselves, that they want it all to be about tzedakah for the wider world. I think I would say a couple of things. You said, can't remember which of you it was, you said that if Teshuva is making amends to other people, and Tefila is like getting right with yourself or being introspective, and where's Tzedaka. And the way that I conceptualize those axes of relationship is actually that Teshuva is getting right with yourself, Tefila is getting right with, higher source, with what's beyond, and Tzedaka is getting right with the world around you. And I think there's something, I think you were alluding to this, Daniel, about you're putting your money where your mouth is. Like it's an action. It's not just like thoughts and prayers, as we have become, want to witness public figures kind of emptily proclaiming. When you give, it's real, and you're it's grounded in the real world. It makes a real impact, as Shula said. Like, I am actually changing the world when I give tzedakah.
President Biden says his father used to say to him, "Joey, show me your budget and I'll show you your values."
I like that. Yeah. That's a great phrase. Yeah.
Part of this citation from the Talmud makes the Talmud sound like it's exactly what we think we mean when we say tzedakah and change of one's deeds. Crying out in prayer does not seem to be tefillah in the Talmud. There's a lot of talk about crying out in distress, kind of like to get God's attention. And I'm not sure that's what I mean when I'm praying in the synagogue, is that I'm trying to get God's attention. I feel more like I'm just letting God know that I'm there and what's going on. But crying out, it's talked about in the Talmud when there is a famine and you're supposed to put on sackcloth, you're supposed to cry out. These are things you do to try to get an end to the famine. I'm not trying to change the world with tefillah. Once in a while, it really changes me. Something that I've been saying, just all of a sudden lights up in neon and has huge meaning for me. And I guess I'm too modern to think that God will care a lot about my praying.
Mm.
But I
Yeah, I
try.
don't know. Yeah. So some great questions there. Is crying out really referring to prayer? And are we really expecting some transcendent power to hear, or is it really about us hearing our prayer? I love these questions. Steve, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I my own personal worldview, yeah, I don't see it in terms of the divine reaching down and like changing the world for you. I see it much more in terms of the prayer parts being about entering being meditative and being self-reflective. And so I don't know if you can really, the technical argument of what the word crying out means, I'm not learned enough to comment on that. I know that exact choice of words is very important in the Talmud, but that's beyond me. That's not what I know about. But I will say that like one of the few moments in the Jewish liturgy that can be transcendent, I mean, not the few, but like one of the definite moments in the liturgy that can be transcendent is the end of Yom Kippur, where everybody hasn't eaten for a while, and that can be a moment where more emotions might come out in prayer than they would otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think there's also something, I mean, I find shofar, which we haven't mentioned yet, as one of the like really powerful points of the High Holy Day cycle, and that something can happen in that field of the sort of sound bath of the shofar. There's some kind of porous or something thin between the worlds. What was I going to say about that? I'm not sure. Oh, but also, yeah, gathering in a larger group than we usually do, which obviously has been a bit disrupted over the last few years. But I think it's even in like very religious communities, which usually have a pretty full house. It's even full, everywhere. It's always fuller on the High Holy Days because everyone comes some of the time, and then everyone all comes at once, and some people come only on the High Holidays too. But even people who, plenty of us who go sometimes, but we all show up for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And there's something about being in that large group of people, I think, to your point, Steve, about like transcendent moments, or like there is something about gathering in this powerful like alignment of intention, or all showing up just simply in being in a large group that is, going to a stadium. Also, there's something about just being around a lot of other people that can be quite powerful.
Yeah.
So you might be familiar, or you might not. There's a poem by Rabbi Rami Shapiro. The refrain is, "We are loved, loved, loved by an unending love," and basically and it's been put to music by Rabbi Shir Yaakov, and the conclusion of the poem is that we are God's hands and eyes and voices when we're calling on God to comfort the sick and tend to the sick and comfort the mourner. We are the people. And I remember reading in I think it was the Dalai Lama saying, when people kind of blame God for the evil in the world, or like ask for God to change things or for God to bring peace, it's like, well, no, that really isn't God who's made those it's us that needs to do these actions. So we may be appealing on that like divine conscience within us, or setting our alignment in a way by going through these rituals. But there isn't any external force who's going to like reach in and manipulate. It's us. I mean, it might reach in and manipulate, but if it does so, largely through us, through our human consciousness and our human action. And that seems true to me. I notice in this phrase from the Talmud that it lists 4 things, tzedaka, crying out, which may or may not mean tefillah, but I think basically the liturgist translates it as tefillah, a changing of one's name and a changing of one's deeds, which I think we align with Teshuva. Although I think that it's interesting that Teshuva has many different ways we can interpret it. Like, does it mean having hard conversations and apologizing? Or does it mean, it has lots of different resonances. But the change of one's name doesn't make it into the liturgy, which is interesting. They decide, like, it's a bit too concrete. Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Is that meant to be a literal change of name, or is that meant to be like a metaphorical name being reputation?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, probably both. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, it could be like changing how you're perceived, like what you're known as. But I think it can be a literal change of name.
Changing your reputation. Yeah, changing what you're known for could sum up a lot of it. I have a probably ridiculous faith in name changing. I took over an abandoned mayor horse quite some years ago.
You abandoned what?
Well, someone had abandoned a young horse, and a animal abuse officer got ownership, but couldn't afford to keep the horse, and figured that she would find somebody to take the horse. But the horse had not been properly educated. She was a really wild young thing. And I finally said, okay, I'll try to take care of her and see if we can make something of her. And the first thing I did was change her name from Shadow to Shoshi, kind of Susie. Not Susanna, just Susie. I wanted her to think of herself as having a cute little girl personality instead of being called a shadow. And it probably didn't help her, but it helped me think of her differently. And I also changed my own name. My family had hidden from me that I was Jewish, probably because I was born at the edge of the Ku Klux Klan prevalence in Colorado. The governor was a Klan member. The mayor of Denver, I was born in Denver, was a Klan member. And I didn't realize that until I was much older. But when I found out that my parents had hidden it from me, that I was Jewish, I was very angry. Because I was feeling at the time I didn't know where I belonged. And it was a huge relief to me to know that there was a place I belonged. And circumstances happened that someone called me Sheila. And I decided, yes, this is so much better not to be called Shirley. That was who I was before I knew I was Jewish. So it's made it quite a difference to me to be called Shula. Help me claim my place in the world. But those are my name change happenings.
Thank you. Yeah. I also have been through different iterations of my name, and it sort of is one way of, like, I feel like I have been in different chapters of my life, depending what people have called me. And it also, I mean, let's have a little look at this. Maimonides, who's obviously writing several hundred years after the Talmud, but actually, you know, he's closer in time to the Talmud than he is to us, or maybe just about in the middle, says in his Hilchot Teshuva that, this is source 5 here, that amongst the paths of repentance is for the penitent to constantly call out before God, crying and entreating, seems like Tefila of a sort, perform charity according to their potential, Tzedaka, to separate themselves far from the object of their sin, some sort of Teshuva we could say, and then it says to change their name, as if to say, I am a different person and not the same one who sinned, which you could say is a certain sort of denial or avoidance of your past. Then he says to change their behavior in its entirety to the good and the paths of righteousness. And lastly, to travel in exile from their home. Exile atones for sin because it causes a person to be submissive, humble, and meek of spirit. So it seems here that as well as to changing the name is not just a sort of energetic of like, I'm in a different phase of my identity, know me differently, but like it could actually be connected to like a real, literal, very practical change of circumstances of going to a new place and calling yourself something different, like setting up a new life somewhere.
Yeah, this is not a theme that I'd ever heard about before with the holiday, this whole idea of completely changing your identity. I wonder, like, how do you mesh that with the whole idea of like, maybe part of the point of the holiday is rebuilding your community or reconnecting with your community. If you're just running away, you're kind of not doing that at all.
Right. Although you might be very ready to find a new community if you actually did move somewhere else and change your name. A needing community.
And maybe that community would be better for you to bring about true teshuva.
Yeah, I guess it's the idea of like something being so toxic that you can't redeem it in a way.
Mm-hmm. When you were telling the story about the horse, Shula, I was reminded of how effective I found it when someone said to me, in fact, our dear friend Andrea, Zichrona Livrecha, I remember her saying to me, she was someone who was an elder and counseled me and one of my sort of support people at Neve. She said, I know that you're a kind and good person, and so when you speak impatiently with people, I know that's not who you really are. And, all of you as parents probably and as educators probably encountered something similar, that when you don't pathologize a person and say, oh, you're a very bad little boy, you were always so naughty, you're always getting sent to the principal's office and you always will be, but you say you're a very good child and I know something must be upsetting you or you wouldn't be behaving like this because this behavior is not very nice, that's a much more effective way to help someone to be their best self, is to call them by a good name.
Also, I think this
letter C, to separate themselves far from the object. So not only because of the trauma and reminders, but also because the person is not the object or the act. They are the person. And if we do believe that God creates the world anew every day, right, then that person at that time that did something that they want forgiveness for should realize that, okay, yes, physically you are that same person, but this is a new time, place. Even if it's the same geography, it's just in the space time, it's new. It's not the same as it was. So you and then back to the talking to other people, be they kids or subordinates or whatnot, like separating the object from, or the act from, the person is so vital for them to not live on in the trauma afterwards, or to really minimize that trauma.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And although it wasn't under traumatic circumstances, and I don't know if you guys resonate with this, Shula, you said you were born in Denver. I don't know if you spent any of your life elsewhere. I know you guys have been elsewhere, but perhaps already with, with your wives, and like in a way that your identity couldn't be too radically reshaped. I certainly found when I moved to Boston to start rabbinical school, I remember having a very strong experience of, I wasn't doing it, to get away from anything or to like start out as a new person. And, that wasn't like the primary reason I was doing it. But I really had the strong experience of the way that people were responding to me was as the person that I was then at that moment in time, rather than as the person that I'd been 10 years earlier or 15 years earlier that they had known all that time. And that just is like a feature of what happens when you start in a new place and, not known to anyone, is they don't know who you were. They're responding to you as you are. And then that reinforces who you are now, which can be quite different from who you were 10 years ago.
There's the word exile too. Often that implies a place where the cultural gaps are larger than, the US and UK, right? It's like, well, personally, I lived in Asia, right? And the cultural gap is massive. And so like the you don't you just lose so much of your security in your frame of the world of what's normal and what you're used to. So I key in on that word because I think it's always, or not always, but often it's like, hey, people aren't going to understand you. They're not going to, you're going to have trouble communicating. And so these types of things, and I don't know, that's the thought that came to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are many ways to go to a new place. The places can be more or less different and alienating, and also different reasons we go to a new place. It is certainly different if we've been chased out of the old place than if we're like, going to seek our fortune out of a spontaneous desire. It did make, when you said the word exile, what popped into my mind was to share that, because I thought you were going in a different direction, since we as Jews, have a lot of ideation around exile. It popped into my head to share that the word diaspora comes from the Greek word spora, meaning spores, same as with just like little plant bits. Diaspora literally means like the sort of scattering of seeds. So whereas galut, which is the Hebrew, is like definitely negative connotation of like we got pushed out, diaspora is more of a fertilization, a spreading into the wider world. So just thought that's interesting. It's pretty much 8:15. I decided not to sort of dive into the big philosophical question. Or there's lots on this source sheet that we haven't looked at yet, so we'll come back to that next week, God willing. Other folks will hopefully join us too. Just wondered if there's anything anyone wanted to share in conclusion, or as a request for something to pull more into focus in a future session.
I'd like to say that your questions seem to me very good.
Thank you.
And also that I really appreciate the comments from Daniel and Steve. I think they're really perceptive. And I'm so glad you told me about that encounter with Andrea. I learned a great deal from her. I was very, very lucky to live next door to her. And I'm very happy to have heard that story. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she's a really wonderful human. One of the greatest blessings of my time at Neve was getting to work closely with her. Yeah. Zichrona livracha. Anything either of you wants to share?
No, but thank you very much. This is nice, and looking forward to the remaining classes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Same. Thank you so much. This was great.
I'll just point out, obviously you can see it's getting dark, that where I'm sitting is in fact what will be my sukkah. Currently has no roof, but the frame stays up all year because it puts shade cloth up and it's a nice place to sit. That wasn't the reason that I sat out here for this class. It was more because it was a pleasant temperature outside and a bit stuffy inside. But so nice to begin this journey already in the framework of the sukkah that, God willing, we'll arrive at and celebrating together in a few weeks' time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Hopefully we won't have technical problems next time. So I'll see you on the hour at 7 o'clock next week.
Thank you.
And maybe tomorrow. Shabbat shalom.
Good night.
And Chodesh Tov.
Shalom.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.